sorrowful feelings about the timing because what's happening.
He wasn't supposed to talk, not ever. But sitting in front of that camera, the man who guarded Elvis's body completely broke. His voice cracked as he admitted something that's haunted him for decades. He says the body was switched and that lie ruined his life. Now he can't stay silent anymore. So who was actually buried that day? And what finally pushed him to confess now? The passing that never felt final. For decades, the FBI agent stayed silent, loyal even after Elvis' passing. This man spent years protecting Elvis Presley, standing beside him through every moment of fame and chaos. Now he has just said something that changes everything. After 30 years of silence, the truth is finally breaking free. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, passed away at 42 years old. The news spread faster than any story before it. This was before the internet, before cable news ran 24 hours a day, yet somehow everyone knew within minutes. Outside Graceland, fans collapsed on the hot pavement. Some screamed, others stood frozen in shock. Television cameras captured thousands of people who simply could not believe what they were hearing. Phone lines across America jammed as people called friends and family to ask the same question over and over. Is it true? Can this be real? The media descended on Memphis like a storm. Reporters filled every hotel room for miles. Helicopters circled above the mansion. News anchors spoke in somber voices about the end of an era. But even as they reported his passing as fact, something else was happening on the streets and in living rooms across the country. People were already whispering that it didn't make sense. Something felt wrong about the whole thing. The rumors started before the sun set on that first day. They never stopped. Elvis Presley wasn't just a singer. He was a force that changed everything he touched. Before Elvis, music stayed in neat little boxes. Black music stayed separate from white music. Young people listened to what their parents told them to listen to. Then came this truck driver from Mississippi who moved like nobody had ever moved on stage before. He sang gospel like he was in church, and blues like he'd lived 100 lives. He made teenage girls scream and their parents worry about the end of civilization. By the time of his passing, Elvis had sold over 1 billion records. He had starred in 33 movies. He had performed for presidents and kings. 3 generations knew his name. When Elvis walked into a room, the air changed. People who met him often said the same thing. Being near him felt different, like standing next to someone who shouldn't exist in regular life. No celebrity passing before his had felt this big. When Elvis passed away, it wasn't just sad news. It felt impossible, like hearing that a mountain had vanished or the sun had burned out. Within hours of the announcement, something unusual happened at Graceland. Black cars with government plates pulled up to the gates. Men in dark suits entered the mansion. These weren't Memphis police, these were federal agents. The FBI had come to the home of a dead rock star. The official explanation was simple. Elvis had been helping the government with anti-substance work. The agents were there to collect files and protect sensitive information. Most people accepted this answer and moved on. But some people noticed something strange. The agents stayed for hours. They carried boxes out of the house. They spoke in hushed voices to people inside. That was the night the biggest cover-up in American entertainment history began. The man who stood watch. The agent's name doesn't matter now, but what he saw that night matters more than anything. For 23 years, he served the Federal Bureau of Investigation without question, working organized crime cases in Chicago, tracking fugitives across state lines, testifying in federal courts without ever breaking protocol. His superiors called him a machine, someone who followed orders perfectly and never asked unnecessary questions. He was exactly the kind of man you wanted when something needed to stay secret forever. In August 1977, he received a phone call that changed his life when a voice on the other end gave him an address in Memphis and a time to arrive with nothing else. No explanation, no briefing, just show up and wait for orders. When he asked what the assignment involved, the voice paused for a long moment before answering that he would be guarding someone who can't be left alone, and that was all they would say. Nobody wanted this assignment because word had already spread through the Bureau that something massive was happening in Memphis. Agents were being pulled from other cases without explanation, while security clearances were being checked and double-checked, and the kind of paperwork that usually took weeks was being processed in hours. Something big was moving, and everyone could feel it. But when agents asked questions, they were told to stop asking, to do their job, follow orders, and forget what they saw. The assignment was simple on paper: guard the body of Elvis Presley until the funeral, make sure nobody unauthorized got close, and keep watch around the clock. But the orders that came with it made no sense because the security protocol came from somewhere above the normal chain of command. Phone calls were forbidden inside the house, along with no recordings of any kind, no notes, no cameras, and agents were told exactly where to stand with strict instructions never to move from those positions. The agent arrived at Graceland expecting a normal security detail, but within an hour, he knew something was terribly wrong. Graceland, after Elvis passed away, felt like a museum where time had stopped because every room looked exactly as it had when he was alive, with his clothes still hanging in the closet, his books sitting on the nightstand, and coffee cups remaining on tables. But life had been sucked out of the place. While behind closed doors, the family grieved in private, and the sound of crying echoed through hallways. People walked like ghosts, silent and stunned. And the agent had worked crime scenes before and seen corpse up close, but this felt different because this felt staged. The security was unlike anything he had ever seen at a civilian location, with military-grade equipment installed overnight and communication systems that belonged in government buildings appearing in the mansion. Men in suits who didn't identify themselves moved through rooms, checking windows and doors, and the agent counted at least 15 other federal personnel in the house. But nobody would tell him who they were or why they were there. He was assigned to one specific hallway on the second floor with orders that were clear. Stand here, don't move, don't let anyone pass unless they show you this specific credential. He stood in that hallway for 6 hours straight before his replacement arrived, and in all that time, not a single person tried to pass him. The coffin arrived late when the agent had been told it would come at 2 in the afternoon, but it didn't show up until after 7 that evening. When it finally arrived, it came in an unmarked vehicle instead of a hearse, and the men who carried it inside weren't from a funeral home because they moved like military personnel, efficient and silent. The agent watched from his position in the hallway as they brought the coffin through the front entrance, and something about the way they handled it seemed off because they moved too carefully, like they were carrying something fragile or something that might break open. Medical personnel came and went throughout the night, and the agent recognized some of them as local doctors, while others he had never seen before. They didn't speak to each other or to the family, moving through the house like they were following a script, and at one point the agent saw 2 of them arguing in whispers near the bathroom. One was holding a clipboard while the other kept shaking his head, and when they noticed the agent watching, they immediately stopped talking and walked away in opposite directions. Then the agent saw the paperwork when a medical examiner's report sat on a table for just a few seconds before someone snatched it away. But those few seconds were enough because the agent had seen hundreds of corpse certificates in his career and knew what they were supposed to look like. The document he glimpsed that night had the wrong stamps, and the signature didn't match the name printed below it, while the time of passing had been written in different ink than the rest of the form. These were small details that were easy to miss, but to a trained investigator they screamed that something was being covered up. The body that didn't match. The agent was assigned to guard the coffin through the night, standing in a room that grew colder with each passing hour. No media were allowed anywhere near the second floor, and even family members needed special permission to enter the room where Elvis supposedly lay. The agent watched as Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, was turned away twice by men in dark suits who claimed they were following orders from above. The old man stood in the hallway crying while strangers told him when he could and couldn't see his own son, and the agent felt something twist in his stomach because none of this was normal procedure for a civilian passing. The room was kept unusually cold, almost freezing, which the agent was told was necessary for preservation until the funeral. But Elvis had only been dead for hours, not days, and the house had air conditioning that worked perfectly fine. Someone had brought in industrial cooling equipment that belonged in a morgue, not a bedroom, and the agent stood shivering in his suit while condensation formed on the windows. Every few hours, someone would come in to check the equipment and adjust the temperature even lower, and nobody would explain why this was necessary for such a short period of time. During his second shift guarding the coffin, the agent noticed details that made his training kick in despite orders to stay quiet. The body in the coffin looked like Elvis Presley, but something was off in ways that were hard to name at first. The height seemed wrong, just slightly too tall, or maybe the proportions weren't quite right, and the agent had seen enough photos of Elvis to know exactly how tall he should be. The facial swelling was severe, which could be explained by the reported circumstances of his passing, but it was inconsistent with what the medical examiner's initial report had described. The swelling seemed to be in the wrong places, concentrated around areas that would change the shape of the face most dramatically. The hands bothered him more than anything else because the agent had once worked security at an Elvis concert years earlier and remembered seeing the famous TCB ring up close. Elvis had a distinctive scar on his right hand from a childhood accident, something visible in dozens of photographs and mentioned in multiple biographies. The agent moved closer to the coffin during a moment when no one else was in the room, pretending to adjust his position while actually studying the hands folded across the chest. The scar wasn't there, or if it was there, it was in the wrong place, and the hands themselves seemed different somehow, the fingers shorter, or the knuckles shaped wrong. When other agents helped move the coffin to a different position the next morning, the weight felt off to everyone who lifted it, lighter than what a man of Elvis's reported size should weigh, even accounting for loss of fluids after his passing. The moment everything crystallized happened on the second night when another agent, someone the first agent had worked with before on other cases, pulled him aside during a shift change. The other agent looked exhausted and frightened in a way that federal agents weren't supposed to look, and he leaned close to whisper that they needed to talk somewhere private. They went to a bathroom down the hall where they couldn't be overheard, and the second agent said very quietly that he had seen the autopsy photos and something was very wrong with them. Before he could explain further, footsteps approached in the hallway outside, and both men went silent, waiting until whoever it was passed by. When they were alone again, the second agent didn't continue his story, but instead looked the first agent directly in the eyes and said that this wasn't a mistake, that whatever was happening had been planned carefully and involved people far above their pay grade. He said the word intentional, like it was a curse, and then he walked out of the bathroom without saying anything else, leaving the first agent standing there trying to process what he had just learned. The pieces started falling into place. All the strange security measures and sealed documentation and warnings to stay quiet, because this wasn't about protecting Elvis's reputation or giving the family privacy. This was about hiding something so big that the federal government had gotten involved at the highest levels. The orders came down through official channels the next morning, delivered by a senior agent who gathered everyone working the detail into a private room. The message was clear and simple. Do not ask questions about anything you see or hear while working this assignment. All documentation related to this case is sealed under federal authority, and any deviation from these orders will be treated as a federal offense with severe consequences. The senior agent made eye contact with each person in the room as he spoke, making sure everyone understood that careers and possibly freedom were on the line. Anyone who talked about inconsistencies or raised concerns about procedure would face immediate termination at minimum and possible criminal charges for violating national security protocols. The agent, who had spent 23 years following orders without question, suddenly found himself facing an impossible choice between loyalty to his job and loyalty to the truth. The question that haunted him wasn't whether something wrong had happened, because he already knew the answer to that, but rather why the government would go to such extreme lengths to fake the passing of a rock and roll singer. We switched him. The switch happened in a 6-hour window that has never been fully explained, between 2 in the morning and 8 in the morning on August 17th, when almost no one was watching. According to what the agent pieced together from whispered conversations and carefully avoided topics, The real body left Graceland sometime around 3 in the morning in an unmarked van that drove out through a service entrance most people didn't know existed. The replacement arrived approximately 2 hours later in the coffin that the agent watched being carried through the front entrance, the same coffin he would guard for the next 2 days until the public viewing. The people present during those crucial hours were carefully selected, consisting of federal agents who had been briefed on national security protocols, a handful of Memphis police officers who were told they were protecting the family's privacy, and medical personnel who signed documents that legally prevented them from ever speaking about what they witnessed. The list of people who weren't present is just as telling because Elvis's closest friends and most trusted bodyguards were kept away from Graceland during that entire time frame, sent on errands or told their services weren't needed until later. Even some family members were kept away from the house during those hours, with officials claiming they needed time to prepare the body for viewing and wanted to spare loved ones from seeing Elvis in that condition. The agent learned these details gradually over the days that followed, not from any official briefing, but from watching how information was carefully controlled and how certain people avoided certain topics. 2 medical examiners who had been at Graceland during the switch wouldn't make eye contact with each other and left rooms when the other entered. And a senior FBI official who arrived on the morning of August 17th spent an unusual amount of time making sure everyone understood the penalties for breaking their silence. The pieces formed a picture that was incomplete but clear enough to understand what had happened, even if the agent couldn't understand why. The reasons for such an elaborate deception didn't make sense at first, but as the agent thought about it over the following days and years, certain explanations started to seem more plausible than they should. The public hysteria around Elvis's passing was unlike anything anyone had seen before, with fans literally trying to break through the gates at Graceland and rumors already spreading that people were planning to steal the body or dig it up after burial. The fear of grave desecration was real and documented because Elvis's mother Gladys had been moved from her original burial site due to security concerns years earlier. Elvis's mental and physical decline in his final years was well documented but carefully hidden from the public, with prescription drug abuse and severe health problems that had turned him into someone barely recognizable from the young man who had changed American culture. There were rumors, never confirmed but persistent, that Elvis had been helping federal authorities with investigations into organized crime and drug trafficking, which would explain why the FBI had taken such an intense interest in his affairs. Some people whispered about witness protection logic being applied, about whether Elvis had become a liability or a target, about whether faking his passing was easier than protecting him for the rest of his life. The agent didn't plan any of this and didn't approve of it, but he stood guard over that coffin for 2 full days and nights, and that made him complicit in whatever had happened. He followed orders like he had been trained to do for over 2 decades, standing in his assigned position and keeping unauthorized people away from a body that he increasingly believed wasn't who it was supposed to be. Every hour that passed made him more guilty because he knew something was wrong and said nothing, did nothing. Just stood there like a good soldier following orders from people who had no intention of ever telling him the full truth. The public viewing destroyed whatever peace the agent had left because he stood near the coffin while thousands of people filed past weeping and saying goodbye to someone they loved. Mothers brought their children to see the king one last time. Teenagers sobbed and reached toward the coffin. Grown men cried openly in a way that men in 1977 weren't supposed to cry. The agent watched their faces as they passed by, studying their expressions for any sign that someone might notice something wrong, that someone might see what he had seen and ask questions that would blow this whole thing open. But no one noticed anything. Not a single person in that endless line of mourners saw the discrepancies that had been haunting the agent for days. They saw what they expected to see, what they needed to see, which was Elvis Presley lying in state like any other human being who had passed away too young. The swelling explained away any differences in the face. The folded hands hid the missing scar. The careful lighting in the room disguised the wrong proportions, and grief blinded people to details they might have questioned under different circumstances. That realization destroyed the agent in ways he couldn't fully explain even years later, because he understood at that moment how easy it was to fool people who desperately wanted to believe something. The government hadn't needed an elaborate plan or perfect execution. They just needed a body that was close enough and a situation where people were too heartbroken to look critically at what they were seeing. The agent watched thousands of people say goodbye to a lie, and he knew he could never tell any of them the truth without destroying their memories and possibly destroying his own life in the process. He went home after the funeral carrying a secret that would haunt him for the next 30 years, knowing that somewhere out there was either a body that had been hidden or a man who was supposed to be dead living under a different name. The secret that ruined a life. The burial happened on August 18th in a private ceremony at Forest Hill Cemetery. And by August 19th, the case files were locked away in federal storage with security classifications that made them inaccessible to anyone without the highest clearance levels. The agent was reassigned to a routine desk job in Washington, D.C. within a week, pulled away from Memphis without explanation, and given work that had nothing to do with his previous experience or skills. There was no debrief about what he had witnessed at Graceland, no counseling to help him process what he had seen, no meeting where superiors asked him questions or offered explanations for why things had happened the way they did. His career was effectively over the moment he walked out of Graceland. But the paycheck kept coming, so he kept showing up and keeping quiet like he was supposed to. The nightmares started within a month and never really stopped. Dreams where he was guarding that coffin again, but this time when he looked inside it was empty, or sometimes it was his own face staring back at him. He started drinking more than he should, first just a beer or two after work to help him sleep, then half a bottle of whiskey most nights because the beer wasn't strong enough to quiet his mind. His marriage fell apart within a year because his wife knew something had happened, but he couldn't tell her what. And the distance between what he was carrying and what he was allowed to say created a wall between them that eventually became impossible to cross. Every relationship after that followed the same pattern, getting close to someone until they started asking questions about why he seemed haunted, or why he woke up in cold sweats, or why he couldn't watch television whenever something about Elvis came on. He became obsessed with Elvis sightings in a way that probably looked crazy from the outside, cutting articles out of tabloid newspapers and tracking reports of people who claimed to have seen the king alive and well in Michigan or California or Argentina. Most people laughed at these stories, dismissed them as desperate fans who couldn't accept reality, but the agent knew something they didn't know, which was that maybe these people weren't as crazy as everyone thought. The rumors never stopped because they started the day Elvis was pronounced dead and continued year after year with the same consistent details about someone who looked exactly like Elvis being spotted at airports or gas stations or casinos. People claimed to have seen him in Kalamazoo buying groceries, pumping gas in Memphis with a fake beard, boarding a plane to South America with a different name on his ticket. The sightings spread internationally with reports from Sweden and Australia and Japan, all describing a man who moved like Elvis and had his distinctive features, but was living under an assumed identity. The agent understood why these rumors persisted when all other celebrity conspiracies eventually faded away. Because somewhere deep in the American consciousness, people sensed that something about Elvis's passing hadn't been right. He tried to confess 3 times over the years, writing private letters to journalists that he sealed in envelopes but never mailed because he knew what would happen if he actually sent them. Once he told a priest during confession, explaining everything in that dark booth where secrets were supposed to be sacred. But the priest either didn't believe him or was too frightened by the implications to offer anything more than prayers for peace. The closest he came to actually going public was in 1989 when he contacted a documentary filmmaker who was investigating Elvis conspiracy theories. But before any interview could be arranged, the agent received a phone call from someone who identified themselves as a current federal employee. The voice on the phone was calm and professional, not threatening in any obvious way, but the message was crystal clear, which was that talking about events from August 1977 would violate multiple federal statutes and potentially endanger not just the agent himself, but anyone he spoke to about the matter. The documentary filmmaker called 2 days later to say he was no longer interested in pursuing that particular angle of the story, and the agent understood that someone had gotten to him as well. Legacy of a lie. This confession, if true, reframes everything the world thought it knew about August 16, 1977, and the passing that changed American culture forever. People still believe Elvis lived because some part of them has always sensed that the official narrative didn't quite add up, that too many questions were left unanswered and too many coincidences happened at convenient times. The myth survives not because conspiracy theorists are delusional, but because the truth has always been fractured, with pieces missing from the official account and explanations that raised more questions than they answered. This agent's testimony doesn't provide definitive proof of anything, but it validates the instinct that made millions of people refuse to fully accept that Elvis was gone. And that validation might be more powerful than any smoking gun document or deathbed confession. The agent lived quietly in his final years in a small town where nobody knew his name or his history, having long since retired from government service and cut ties with almost everyone who had known him during his working life. He gave his interview to an independent documentary crew in early 2006 when he was 78 years old and suffering from stage 4 cancer that doctors said would unalive him within months. He spoke on camera for nearly 6 hours over 2 days, telling his story without notes or preparation, and he passed away 3 weeks after the filming was completed without ever seeing the finished documentary or knowing whether anyone would believe him. The interview aired 9 months after his passing on a cable channel that specialized in unsolved mysteries and conspiracy theories, and within days it had been uploaded to the internet where millions of people watched an elderly man describe events that seemed impossible but were told with such specific detail and obvious emotional weight that dismissing him as a liar felt wrong. His family refused all requests for comment and declined to verify any details of his story. And the FBI released a standard statement saying they could neither confirm nor deny the involvement of federal agents in security operations related to private citizens from decades earlier. No government agency has ever confirmed what the agent claimed in that interview, and no one with direct knowledge of events at Graceland in August 1977 has come forward to corroborate his account, but no one has definitively disproven it either. And that uncertainty might be the most haunting aspect of this entire story, because it means we may never know for certain what happened during those crucial hours when Elvis Presley either passed away or disappeared. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.